talked about the foundation of an MDM strategy, which is really start with the business problem, not the how of how you're going to solve that problem. The next piece is obviously the pillars that support that strategy, and really everything begins with governance, which is oftentimes something we see customers unfortunately save till later. But in an ideal world, every MDM program would start with trying to lay out the right process for governance. And governance is this very broad topic that's somewhat hard to pin down. A lot of organizations aren't sure how to do it. But stated simply, governance is just the process through which you get the right people, the right stakeholders from the business together to start making decisions around your data management program.
Yeah, I think you just definitely need to know who has a stake in this data, right? That's the first thing you need to know whenever you're talking about governance. Who really cares about this data and is using it across the enterprise? And when I say enterprise, it really doesn't have to be the entire enterprise. When you're starting a project, I think starting small and growing out bigger is better, essentially, because a lot of times it's hard to say, well, who uses customer across the entire organization? You could spend 6 months just trying to figure out how that works. But if you start in a department, it's much easier to figure that out. But yeah, figuring out each attribute and how each system uses it, that really all comes into governance, which just allows you to kind of know the lay of the land to start with, and then you can actually start putting some tools and processes on top of it to understand what to do.
Yeah, I think the best way to illustrate good governance is by describing the challenges you run into without any form of governance, right? So let's say hypothetically, hey, we're implementing an MDM for the first time, and we have this question, we have this new data element that we want to manage about customers. Well, is that information already in, say, our CRM system? Should we add it there? Should we only maintain it inside of our MDM solution because we don't need that information in CRM? So governance is just having the right people at the table to have those debates and fundamentally make the decision. Without that process or organization in place, what you wind up with is IT making their best guess. Sometimes they guess right, sometimes they guess wrong, and when they guess wrong, the challenge is that it devalues the program and casts doubt upon its value.
Yeah, I have a funny story. Early in my career, I was at a company, and it was a bank, and they were managing their branches, and I was like, oh, well, you want to use our software for managing branches? And they're like, oh, we've got an Excel spreadsheet that takes care of it. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, I could just put that in. It doesn't take much time. And they're like, sure. And so I brought the spreadsheet in, and I was going to try to do it. And I found out that the unique keys that they were telling me the unique keys, there was 3 things that had the same key ID. And I was like, gosh, it's weird that they're using this. And I went back and checked it out. And they were like, oh, well, that's because there's ATMs outside of these things. It turned out that somebody wasn't worried about the ATMs. It had started in one group, and that one person had this Excel spreadsheet, and because of no governance, they had passed it to 5 or 6 other people, and then somebody said, well, IT should manage this for us, right? And IT put it out on the website. It was on their main website or internal website where they would pass around this branch list. Nobody was managing it, right? It was basically out on their website, and I was like, oh, I've talked to all the people, I know all the owners and who's using this now, and nobody's keeping track of this, and this is 6 years old, and they built 12 systems off of this spreadsheet, right? And they're all like, oh my gosh, right? So there will always be governance, whether it's good or bad, but if you're not in charge of it, it usually ends up bad. Right?
One of the best benefits of having a governance organization is understanding the roles of the actual implementation, the operations, who's responsible for measuring performance, because you've got to have that. If you don't know who's in charge, you're going to end up with that spreadsheet, which is essentially not being managed, but is being used.
Right, because people will trust what they think is important, even though there may not be any real trust behind it.
If it's on an official website, it's got to be real, right?
That's right.